I walked into my father's office expecting to finalize the biggest expansion deal of our careers. Instead, I watched him slide a stack of documents across his mahogany desk, his pen already uncapped. The room smelled like leather and old cigars, the same smell I'd trusted for 15 years. He didn't look at me when he signed his name 3 times, each stroke deliberate and final. Then he said the words that stopped my heart, "You'll step aside quietly." My younger brother Connor stood in the corner, arms crossed, wearing a smirk I'd seen 1,000 times before. The company we'd built together, $600 million worth of steel, concrete, and sweat, was now his. Just like that. My father pressed a button on his desk phone and security appeared at the door. "Escort Mason out," he said, still not meeting my eyes. I felt the floor tilt beneath me as 2 men I'd hired myself walked me toward the elevator. In that moment, I understood something that made my stomach drop. My father hadn't just replaced me. He'd erased me. As the elevator doors began to close, my father finally looked up and whispered, "You'll understand someday." But I already knew the truth. I never would. I sat in my truck in the parking garage for 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The engine wasn't running. I just stared at the concrete wall in front of me, replaying every single moment that had led to this. 15 years of late nights at construction sites, of saving deals that were falling apart, of solving problems nobody else could fix. I'd given up weekends, holidays, relationships. I'd missed my best friend's wedding because we had a crisis in Austin. I'd slept in my office more nights than I'd slept in my own bed. And for what? To be walked out like a security risk? My phone buzzed with messages from the office, but I couldn't look at them yet. Instead, I decided to drive to the properties I'd built with my own hands, the ones I'd designed from the ground up. Maybe if I saw them, I could understand where everything went so terribly wrong. My name is Mason Hale, and I just lost everything I thought was mine. I turned the key and the engine roared to life, but as I drove toward the first site, something strange happened. The site director, a man named Carlos who'd worked with me for 8 years, looked genuinely confused when he saw me. "Mason? What are you doing here? I thought you were in meetings all week." He had no idea I'd been let go. The next 3 sites were exactly the same. Every director, every foreman, every supervisor looked at me like nothing had changed. Some asked about upcoming projects. Others wanted approval on budget adjustments. Nobody knew. My father hadn't even told them. He just quietly erased my name from the paperwork and expected the empire to keep running without me. By the 4th site, my confusion turned into something sharper. I started asking questions carefully, trying to understand what they'd been told. "Has anyone from corporate reached out this week?" I asked Michael, a project manager I'd personally trained. He shook his head. "Just the usual stuff." "What? Is something going on?" I told him everything was fine and drove away, but my mind was racing. If my father wanted me gone so badly, why hadn't he announced it? Why keep it quiet? What was he afraid people would find out? I pulled into a coffee shop parking lot and finally opened my phone. 43 messages. Most were from employees asking routine questions. But 3 were from someone I hadn't expected to hear from. Mr. Faraday, one of our longest-standing clients. "Mason, we need to talk. Call me when you can." I dialed his number immediately. Mr. Faraday picked up on the first ring. "Mason, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all day." His voice sounded strained, worried even. We met at his office an hour later, a sleek building downtown that his company had hired us to construct 5 years ago. He closed the door behind us and gestured for me to sit. "I'm going to be direct," he said, folding his hands on his desk. "Something feels wrong. Connor called me yesterday to introduce himself as the new point of contact. He didn't mention you once. He talked about making changes, about doing things differently, about bringing in his own vision." Mr. Faraday leaned forward, his eyes searching mine. "Mason, you're the only reason I trusted your company in the first place. You saved that Richmond project when everyone else said it was impossible. You've never lied to me, never cut corners, never played games." He paused, and I could see the question forming before he asked it. "Did you quit or were you pushed?" The weight of his words hung in the air between us. I wanted to lie, to protect what was left of the company's reputation, but I couldn't. "I was pushed," I said quietly. Mr. Faraday sat back in his chair, processing. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Connor's already making reckless decisions. Big ones." I drove home in silence, my conversation with Mr. Faraday replaying in my head like a warning alarm. When I finally walked through my front door, I tossed my keys on the counter and opened my laptop. I needed to see what Connor was doing, how he was presenting himself. What I found made my jaw clench. Connor had posted on every social media platform, announcing his official takeover of the company with photos of himself in my father's office, sitting in the chair I'd sat in countless times during strategy meetings. The captions were worse: excited to lead this empire into the future. New vision. New energy. New era. As if he'd built anything. As if he'd spent even one night on a construction site. The comments section was a mess. Clients were asking questions. Competitors were circling. But what caught my attention were the private messages flooding my inbox. Employees, people I'd worked alongside for years, were asking why I was gone. Some were angry. Others were confused. But one message stood out from all the rest, sent by someone I didn't recognize: "We're starting to notice missing funds." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Missing funds? I screenshot the message and saved it. Then I started digging. I spent the entire night going through old financial records I'd kept on my personal hard drive, files I'd backed up years ago for safety. My father always said I was too careful, too meticulous, but right now that carefulness was about to pay off. I pulled up spreadsheets from the past 5 years and started cross-referencing projects Connor had been involved in. The patterns emerged slowly at first, then all at once like a picture coming into focus. Every project Connor had failed had suspicious withdrawals attached to it. Money moving in ways that didn't make sense. Budget overruns that were quietly forgiven. Mistakes that should have cost him his position but somehow disappeared into footnotes. And every single time my father had signed off on it. He'd protected Connor for years, covering his losses, hiding his incompetence, while constantly criticizing me for being too cautious with spending. I felt sick. But then I saw something that stopped me cold. A line item from 18 months ago, a transfer of $75,000 labeled operational consulting. The account it went to wasn't Connor's. It belonged to someone else inside the company. Someone was helping him. And my father knew. The next morning I got a text from an unknown number. "We need to meet. Somewhere private. It's about the company." I almost deleted it, but something made me respond. "Who is this?" The reply came instantly: "Jordan. Senior accountant. I can't talk at the office." We met at a diner 30 miles outside the city, the kind of place where nobody would recognize us. Jordan looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. He slid into the booth across from me and immediately pulled out a folder. "I shouldn't be doing this," he said, glancing toward the door. "But I can't stay silent anymore." He showed me ledgers, recent ones with highlighter marks on dozens of entries. Connor's been pulling cash out since the day he took over. He's reclassifying legitimate expenses as losses, then pocketing the difference. He told me to make it look clean. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more, all funneled through accounts that didn't match any real project. "Does my father know?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Jordan looked at me with something like pity. "Your father signs everything," he said. "He's known from the beginning." I couldn't breathe right for the rest of the day. Every time I tried to process what Jordan had told me, my chest tightened. My father wasn't just protecting Connor. He was actively participating in the fraud. That night, I drove to my father's house, the same house I'd grown up in, the one with the wraparound porch and the oak tree out front. I didn't plan what I'd say. I just needed answers. I parked down the street and walked up to the front door, but before I could knock, I heard his voice through the open window. He was on the phone, pacing in his office. "Mason was getting too involved," he said, his tone sharp and cold. "He was asking too many questions, looking at things he shouldn't have been looking at. We needed him out of the way before he figured it out." The words hit me like a physical blow. I pressed my back against the side of the house, hidden in the shadows, trying to steady myself. After everything I'd done, after everything I'd sacrificed, he hadn't been blindsided by some sudden decision. He'd orchestrated my removal. He'd planned it. "Don't worry," my father continued. "Connor's in position now. Everything's under control." Then I heard the voice on the other end, faint through the speaker. But I recognized it instantly. It was Connor. I walked through the front door without knocking. My father looked up, startled, his phone still in his hand. "Mason, what are you—" "I heard everything," I said, my voice steady despite the rage boiling inside me. For a moment he didn't say anything. Then he set the phone down slowly and straightened his shoulders, slipping back into the authoritative mask he always wore. "You need to understand something," he said. "Connor needs this more than you do. He doesn't have your independence, your resilience. You'll be fine." "He won't." I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. "So you threw me out to protect him?" "I gave him an opportunity," my father corrected. You were always going to leave eventually, Mason. You're too strong-willed. Connor needs guidance, structure, a legacy handed to him. That's when it hit me. He didn't want a son. He wanted someone who would never outgrow him, never challenge him, never become more than his shadow. I was too independent and that threatened him. You're rewriting history, I said quietly. You're crediting Connor for deals I closed, projects I saved. My father didn't deny it. He just looked at me with something close to pity. That's business, son. And you'll see in time this was the right call. I turned and walked out, knowing I'd never step into that house again. Within a week, the cracks started showing. My phone rang constantly, but not from my father or Connor. It was clients. People I'd worked with for years, partners who trusted me with their biggest projects. The first call came from a developer in Phoenix. Mason, what the hell is going on? Connor's team missed our deadline, and now they're saying we need to renegotiate terms. This was locked in months ago. The second call was worse. A contractor in Nashville told me Connor had rewritten protocols I'd spent years perfecting, and now materials weren't arriving on time. Projects were stalling. The third, fourth, and fifth calls all said the same thing. Everything was falling apart. Connor was trying to assert dominance by changing processes he didn't understand, dismantling systems that worked because he wanted to prove he wasn't following in my footsteps. I didn't respond to most of the calls. I just listened, took notes, and watched the empire I'd built start to crumble under his hands. Then one afternoon I got a message that changed everything. It was from Victor Langley, one of the biggest investors we'd ever landed. Mason, we need to talk. Urgently. Can you meet me tomorrow? I agreed, and as I hung up, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't over yet. Victor Langley's office was on the 40th floor, all glass and steel with a view that stretched across the city. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. I'm pulling my funding, he said, sliding a document across the table. Unless you come back. I blinked, stunned. Victor, I don't have any authority anymore. My father? I don't care about your father, Victor interrupted. I back this company because of you. Your vision, your integrity, your ability to deliver. Connor doesn't have any of that. And frankly, neither does your father. He leaned forward, his expression serious. I've been in this business for 30 years, Mason. I know when someone's trying to pull a fast one. Your brother's already dodging my calls, and your father's feeding me PR nonsense. Then he said something that made my heart stop. There's a clause in my original investment contract. Did you know that? I shook my head. It ties funding stability to leadership continuity. Specifically, it references your involvement in strategic oversight. Your father buried it in the fine print and probably forgot it existed. Victor slid another paper toward me, a copy of the contract with a highlighted section. If you're not involved, I can legally withdraw. And when I do, others will follow. I stared at the document, barely able to process what I was seeing. My father had trapped himself. And he had no idea. I didn't contact my father. I didn't warn Connor. I just waited. 3 days later, the news broke. Victor Langley announced he was reconsidering his investment in Hale Development Group, citing leadership concerns. The financial blogs picked it up immediately. Stock analysts started speculating. Other investors grew nervous. I watched it unfold from my laptop, sitting in my apartment with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Connor panicked. He held an emergency press briefing, trying to reassure everyone that the company was stable, that leadership was strong, that everything was under control. But his voice shook. His answers were vague. He contradicted himself twice in 5 minutes. My father tried to call me. The phone buzzed on my kitchen counter, his name flashing on the screen. I watched it ring until it went to voicemail. He called again an hour later. Then again that night. I didn't answer. Let him sit with the silence the same way I'd sat with mine when he had me escorted out. Then, just as I thought the day couldn't get more surreal, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. Mason Hale? The voice asked. This is Lawrence Whitman. I'm an attorney representing some of your former partners. We need to talk about something your father tried to bury. Lawrence Whitman met me the next morning at a quiet law office across town. He was older, sharply dressed, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from winning cases nobody thought could be won. He laid a thick file on the table between us. 5 years ago, he began, you and several partners created a shareholder agreement for a series of development assets. Your father signed off on it, but I don't think he read it carefully. Or maybe he just assumed it wouldn't matter. I leaned forward. What does it say? Lawrence opened the file and pointed to a section highlighted in yellow. It legally acknowledges your role in creating and managing several high-value properties. Not as an employee, but as a co-creator with equity rights tied to performance benchmarks. My breath caught. My father buried this? He buried it, Lawrence confirmed. And he never updated it when he transferred control to Connor. Which means, legally, you still have rights to portions of those assets. Rights he thought he'd stripped away when he removed you. I sat back, letting the weight of it sink in. My father had been so focused on pushing me out that he'd forgotten to cover his tracks. What does this mean practically? I asked. Lawrence smiled. It means you have leverage. Real leverage. And if you play this right, you can take back what's yours. Connor's public meltdown happened faster than I expected. He scheduled a press conference to address the rumors about instability, but it went sideways almost immediately. I watched it live from my phone, standing in a grocery store parking lot. He stood behind a podium, sweat visible on his forehead under the studio lights, and tried to project confidence. But within minutes he was rambling. He blamed internal traders for leaking information. He accused competitors of spreading lies. He promised that the company was stronger than ever, but he couldn't explain how. A reporter asked about the leadership transition and Connor snapped. My brother couldn't handle the pressure, he said, his voice rising. He walked away because he wasn't strong enough to lead. The room went silent. Even through the screen I could feel the tension. Then, in his desperation to prove he was in control, Connor made a fatal mistake. He started talking about upcoming projects, confidential deals that weren't public yet. He named clients, locations, and budget figures. By the time his PR team cut the feed, the damage was done. Every media outlet in the industry was running headlines within the hour. Hale Development Heir exposes confidential projects in unhinged press conference. I turned off my phone and sat in my truck, staring at the steering wheel. Connor was drowning. And my father was about to realize just how badly he'd miscalculated. My father finally cornered me at a restaurant downtown. I don't know how he knew I'd be there, but he was waiting at my table when I arrived. He stood when he saw me, his face tight with frustration. We need to talk, he said. I didn't sit down. There's nothing to talk about. Mason, please. His voice softened, and for a moment, he almost sounded like the father I remembered from childhood. This whole situation got out of hand. It was supposed to be temporary. Connor just needed time to find his footing. I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. Temporary? I thought you'd stay close, maybe consult on the side, he continued. I didn't think you'd actually leave. You had security walk me out, I said, my voice low but firm. You didn't think I'd leave? He looked away and I saw it then, the faint flicker of regret. But it wasn't enough. I assumed you'd always stay loyal, he admitted quietly. No matter what I did. No matter how I treated you. I thought you'd always come back because you loved the work. That was the moment I understood. He hadn't valued me. He just assumed I was too devoted to ever walk away. You were wrong, I said simply. Then I turned and left him standing there, alone, in a restaurant full of people who didn't know his empire was falling apart. The employees started reaching out within days. First, it was just a few messages on my personal email. Then it became a flood. People I'd worked with for years, some I'd hired myself, were resigning and asking if I was starting something new. Connor fired Marcus, one message read. After 12 years. No warning. Just told him he didn't fit the new culture. Another said, he replaced our entire safety team with his college friends. None of them have construction experience. I read every message carefully, my anger building with each one. Connor wasn't just ruining the company. He was dismantling the culture I'd spent years creating, pushing out loyal people and replacing them with buddies who had no idea what they were doing. Then, late one Thursday night, I got a message from someone I deeply respected. Kyle, a senior engineer who'd been with the company since the beginning. Mason, there's something you need to see. It's bad. Can we meet? We met the next morning at a construction site that had been shut down for inspections. Kyle looked pale, nervous. He handed me a tablet with blueprints pulled up. Connor approved this, he said, pointing to a structural design. He overrode your original specs and pushed it through without an engineering review. I stared at the blueprints, my stomach sinking with every detail I noticed. The load-bearing calculations were wrong. The materials Connor had approved were cheaper, weaker, completely inadequate for the building's height. If this went forward, the structure could fail. People could get hurt. How did this get approved? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Kyle shook his head. Connor told the team you were too cautious, that your designs were overbuilt and wasted money. He said he was optimizing the process. Optimizing, I repeated, the word tasting bitter. Kyle, this isn't optimization. This is negligence. If this building goes up and something happens, I know, Kyle interrupted. That's why I'm showing you. Because there's more. He swiped to another screen, showing email correspondence between Connor and the project manager. Your father knew about the changes. He signed off on them. I felt the air leave my lungs. My father had not only removed me but he'd approved a disaster waiting to happen, all to protect Connor's ego. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was dangerous. Do we have documentation? I asked. Kyle nodded. Everything. Emails, approval signatures, the original plans versus the modified ones. It's all here. I looked at the building site, half finished and already compromised. Send me everything, I said. Every file, every email, every document. If this goes public, we need irrefutable proof. I spent 2 days reviewing everything Kyle had sent me, cross-referencing it with the financial records Jordan had provided. The picture was complete now. Connor was draining money while cutting corners. My father was covering it up. And the entire company was heading toward a cliff. For the first time since I'd been forced out, I didn't feel hurt. I felt clarity. Cold, focused, unstoppable clarity. I realized something important. The best revenge wasn't destroying what they'd built. It was proving I could build something better, something clean, something that stood on integrity instead of lies. And then letting the truth expose them for what they really were. I opened my laptop and started drafting documents. Business filings. Partnership proposals. A vision statement. By midnight, I had the foundation of something entirely new. The next morning, I walked into the county registrar's office and filed paperwork for a new development firm. The name I chose was simple, clear, and mine. Mason Hale Development. No legacy to live up to. No father's shadow to stand in. Just me. Within hours, word started to spread. My phone buzzed with messages from former clients, colleagues, and competitors. Everyone wanted to know if the rumors were true. I didn't answer most of them. I just kept working. Because I knew what was coming next. The clients came to me almost immediately. People I'd worked with for years reached out, asking if I was taking on new projects. I said yes. Within 2 weeks, I'd signed 3 contracts, projects that had been in talks with my father's company but had stalled under Connor's leadership. The clients didn't hesitate. They trusted me, not the company name. I hired the employees Connor had fired or mistreated. Marcus, my former operations lead. Kyle, the engineer who'd exposed the safety issues. Others who'd quietly reached out, asking for a second chance. My new office was small, nothing like the corporate headquarters I'd left behind, but it felt different. It felt like mine. Word spread fast. Industry blogs picked up the story. Former Hale development leader launches independent firm, employees follow. Projects that had been unstable under Connor's management found their footing under mine. Investors who'd hesitated with my father's company committed to mine without question. Then one morning I woke up to a message from my father. It was short, typed in all capitals, seething with fury, "You're undermining the family." I stared at the screen and for the first time in weeks I smiled. I wasn't undermining anything. I was just showing the world what real leadership looked like. And they were crumbling in the shadow of it. The lawsuit hit my father's company on a Tuesday morning. A construction firm had filed a claim over the structural issues Kyle had shown me, the ones Connor had approved and my father had signed off on. The news spread instantly. Financial analysts called it a critical blow. Investors who'd been hesitant before now moved to freeze their funding. Media outlets dug into the story and suddenly, everything I'd kept quiet was surfacing. The financial mismanagement, the dangerous shortcuts, the leadership chaos. Within 48 hours, the company was in full crisis mode. Connor tried to release statements, but every word he said made it worse. My father stayed silent, which somehow looked even more guilty. Then late one night my phone rang. It was a reporter from a major business outlet. "Mr. Hale, we're covering the situation at your former company. Would you be willing to provide a statement?" I thought about it for a long moment. I could stay silent, let them destroy themselves. Or I could tell the truth. "I built that company with my father for 15 years, I said carefully. "I'm proud of the work we did together. But leadership requires accountability, transparency, and integrity. I hope they find their way back to those principles." It was measured, professional, and devastatingly clear. The article ran the next morning with my quote as the headline. And the market reacted immediately. I was in my office late one Thursday when someone knocked on the door. I looked up, expecting a delivery, but instead, Connor stood there. He looked terrible. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, and his eyes were red like he hadn't slept in days. "Mason," he said, his voice barely steady. "Can we talk?" I gestured to the chair across from my desk. He sat down slowly, like the weight of the world was pressing on his shoulders. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, Connor broke. "I'm in over my head," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I don't know what I'm doing. The investors are furious. The lawsuits keep coming. Dad won't admit we made a mistake, and I can't fix it on my own." He looked at me, desperation clear in his eyes. "I need you to come back. Fix everything like you always do. Please." I leaned back in my chair, studying him. For years, I'd watched him take credit for my work, dismiss my ideas, and smirk while our father chose him over me. And now he was here asking me to save him. "No," I said simply. Connor's face fell. "Mason, please. I'm your brother." "You're my brother when it's convenient," I replied. "But when Dad handed you everything, you didn't hesitate. You didn't question it. You just took it and smiled." He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up my hand. "I'm not coming back, Connor. You made your choice. Now live with it." The board meeting happened 3 weeks later. I wasn't there, but I heard about it from multiple sources. Investors, board members, and senior partners all gathered to discuss the future of the company. My father stood at the head of the table, trying to regain control the way he always had, with authority and confidence. But this time it didn't work. One by one, the board members questioned his decisions. They brought up the lawsuit, the financial losses, Connor's public meltdowns. They asked why he'd removed the one person who'd been holding everything together. My father tried to deflect, to blame external factors, to promise things would stabilize. But the board had already made their decision. They voted to remove him from active leadership. He would remain a figurehead, a name on the letterhead, but he'd have no real power. Connor was stripped of his title entirely, reassigned to a meaningless advisory role. The company would be restructured, leadership brought in from the outside. Everything my father had tried to control was taken from him in a single vote. That night my phone rang. It was him. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mason," he said, and his voice broke. He was crying. I'd never heard my father cry before. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I need you." I closed my eyes, letting his words settle. Then I said quietly, "You needed me 15 years ago. You just didn't realize it until it was too late." My father asked to meet me in person a few days later. We sat in the same coffee shop where I'd met Jordan months ago, the day everything started to unravel. He looked older now, the weight of his mistakes etched into every line on his face. "I made a terrible choice," he said, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. "I thought Connor needed the company more than you did. I thought you'd be fine no matter what." He paused, struggling to find the words. "I thought you'd always forgive me." I didn't say anything. I just listened. "I'm sorry," he continued. "Not for what I did, but for needing you. I see that now. I see how much I relied on you, how much the company relied on you. And I threw it all away because I was too proud to admit Connor wasn't ready." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get from him. But even then he didn't truly understand. He was sorry for the consequences, not the betrayal. Sorry he'd lost control, not that he'd hurt me. "I forgive you," I said finally, and I meant it. Not because he deserved it, but because holding on to the anger was only hurting me. But forgiveness doesn't mean I'm coming back. It doesn't mean things go back to the way they were. He nodded slowly, tears in his eyes. And in that moment I finally let go. Not of the past, but of his power over me. My company grew faster than I'd ever imagined. Within 6 months, I doubled my client base. Projects that had once seemed impossible were now in progress, built on solid foundations with teams that trusted each other. Investors celebrated my leadership. Former employees thanked me for creating a workplace built on respect instead of fear. I was featured in industry magazines, invited to speak at conferences, recognized as a leader who'd walked away from everything and built it back better. One evening, I stood in my office looking out at the city skyline, the buildings I'd designed scattered across the horizon. My phone buzzed with a notification, an email I'd been waiting for. It was from a development group in California, offering me the biggest contract I'd ever been offered. Bigger than anything my father had trusted me with. Bigger than anything I'd imagined when I first started. I opened the email and read through the details: a resort complex spanning 3 properties, a $250 million project with my name as lead architect and developer. I closed my laptop and smiled. This was what I'd been working toward. Not revenge. Not validation. Just proof that I didn't need my father's company to build something extraordinary. I'd done it on my own terms with my own vision. And this was only the beginning. The call came on a Wednesday morning. I was reviewing blueprints when my assistant knocked on my door. "Mason, you have a call from the board at Hale Development Group." I looked up, surprised. "Put it through." The voice on the other end was professional, measured. "Mr. Hale, I'm calling on behalf of the board. As you may know, the company has been struggling since the restructuring. We've brought in outside leadership, but the damage to our reputation has been severe. We're exploring options for stabilization, and one of those options is acquisition." I set down my pen, listening carefully. Several buyers have expressed interest, but the board believes the best outcome would be for someone who understands the company's legacy to take control. Someone who built it. There was a long pause. "We'd like to offer you the opportunity to purchase Hale Development Group." I sat back in my chair, letting the words sink in. The company my father had taken from me. The empire I'd built with my own hands. They were offering it back. Not as a gift. As a purchase. "What's the asking price?" I asked. They named a figure significantly lower than the company's value at its peak, but fair given the current circumstances. "I'll need time to consider," I said. "Of course. Take all the time you need." I hung up and stared at the phone. The final twist I never saw coming. I made my decision 3 days later. I called the board and told them I'd purchased the company, but on my terms. No favors. No family sentiment. Just business. The signing took place in a conference room downtown, the same building where I'd once sat in strategy meetings with my father. The board members were there, along with lawyers and financial advisors. My father and Connor were not. I signed the documents quickly, efficiently. When it was done, the company was mine. Not as my father's son. As its new owner. I walked into the headquarters the next day, the building I'd been escorted out of months ago. Employees looked up as I passed, some with relief, others with curiosity. I called a company-wide meeting that afternoon. My father and Connor sat in the back row, silent and small. I stood at the front and addressed everyone. "This company was built on hard work, integrity and trust," I said. "Somewhere along the way we lost that. But we're going to find it again." I looked directly at my father. "You didn't make me. You limited me. Losing everything was the best thing you ever did for me. Because it taught me that I didn't need your approval to succeed. I just needed to believe in myself." My father watched silently, his face unreadable. I continued, "I'm rebuilding this company. Not to humiliate anyone, but to protect the people who rely on it. To honor the work we started together. And to prove that leadership isn't about control. It's about responsibility." As I walked out of the room, I felt lighter than I had in years. They tried to cut me out of the legacy. So I built a bigger one.